Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the shocking story of Shirley MacLaine smiled despite waiting until 91 to reveal this shocking information. Interviews while concealing the true narrative of what transpired behind the scenes, but today she discloses the true cause. She required alternative shooting schedules, different trailers, and even different from the first yelling fights to the envious rivalry. Promotional trips. Hollywood's most brutally honest star isn't holding anything back after turning film sets into battlefields. During the height of the Great Depression, Shirley MacLaine was born in Richmond, Virginia, and her father had multiple jobs. Jobs to support the family. He sold, assisted in running schools, and taught psychology. Real estate when he had to deal with her mother, who was Canadian and had a history of drama that would later influence throughout her life. Shirley was named after Shirley Temple, who was already at the time. It was nearly a hint that her younger brother Warren was a kid star. Even though he spelled their last name differently as a child, Batty would go on to become famous in Hollywood. Around Virginia, going from town to town while her father changed professions. Although Shirley was brought up as a Baptist, she would later develop more spiritual ideas. In addition to being artistic, she was also athletic. She even played baseball with the boys. Acquired the moniker, Powerhouse, due to the fact that she out-hit all of them in home runs, although prior to all of that, Shirley had a weakness in her ankles, which caused her to tumble frequently. Her mother said what began as rehabilitation in ballet classes became her passion. She attended the Washington School of Ballet to train, and she never missed a class. She was frequently cast as a boy because she was taller than the other girls. Characters in shows. She even fractured her ankle on stage at one show. But Shirley was tough-focused, so she tightened her shoes and danced nevertheless. And never one to give up. She finally saw that she lacked the she literally had the correct feet for ballet. Therefore she left it without wasting any. Before even graduating from high school, she spent some time determining her future course of action. She went to New York for tryouts and was cast in a small part in a subway adaptation of Oklahoma, and after graduating in 1952, she became permanently enamored with theater. She relocated to New York City from Arlington, and her name was Shirley MacLaine. She modified it by using her mother's maiden name because it was difficult for producers to pronounce. Name and started going as Shirley MacLaine, whose new name would soon be in the spotlight. In Me and Juliet by Rodgers and Hammerstein's chorus, and even though she was merely a background dancer at the time, people took notice of her. After her attempt, she was hired to play the lead in The Pajama Game as an understudy. It wasn't a fortuitous break for Carol Haney, who had to step in after being hurt. Her performance changed everyone's lives, including producer Halby Wallace, who was in the audience, was hurt. A few months later, it happened again, and Shirley was filled with Wallace moved in this time, and Shirley instantly changed from a Wallace, a Hollywood actress's backup dancer, offered her a 5-year contract. Hollywood's old-school studio of the 1950s was Paramount. Wallace had a reputation for seeing stars early, but the cracks were beginning to appear. He noticed something special about Shirley, who didn't even have time to settle in. 3 months later, Sarah and Alfred were in Vermont filming her premiere. Hitchcock's strange, dark comedy, The Trouble with Harry, and she won a Golden Globe for Best New Actress because of her outstanding performance. Her next major role was in the star-studded movie Around, therefore she was off to the races. What was unknown at the time in the world in 80 Days was that she became pregnant while filming and soon after gave birth to her daughter Sachi, although rather than remaining at home, Shirley and her spouse, Steve Parker, decided that Sachi would reside with her father and his lover in Japan while Shirley concentrated on her work. It was an odd arrangement that would eventually lead to a great deal of friction between mother and daughter, and in 1958 she finally made her breakthrough as a serious performer, and she was specifically chosen by Frank Sinatra for the part of Jenny in Some Came Running was originally intended for Marilyn Monroe, but when that failed, Shirley took over and jumped right into the maintained in character by bringing a plush dog to the scene. Sinatra informed the director he understood what he was doing because he hit the camera and nailed the part. He was correct about the performance when he said that having her character die in the movie would help her receive an Oscar nomination. Earned Shirley her first Academy Award nomination and demonstrated that she was more than just a comedian. Actress, although things weren't that glamorous behind the scenes. Wallace, the man who had found her, and according to Shirley, he once made unwanted advances. She slapped him severely when he forced himself on her, and she finally filed a lawsuit. She won years after punching a Hollywood reporter over contract disputes. In the mouth following his derogatory writing about her, which caused headlines, and it demonstrated how adamantly she refused to be subjugated by 1960. She collaborated with actor Jack Lemmon and director Billy Wilder on What Would She played Fran Kubelik in The Apartment, which went on to become one of the most famous movies of the time. The film, which starred a vulnerable lady in a complex office romance, was a huge 10 Oscar nominations for its success, and Shirley received her second nomination for although she didn't win Best Actress that year, her performance was remarkable. She did receive accolades abroad and became well known throughout the world for the role years. Charlize Theron would subsequently claim that Shirley gave the black and white movie the impression that in the 1960s, when it was in color, Shirley MacLaine was at the heart of. She wasn't just another attractive face seeking stardom during Hollywood's golden age, she was taking significant risks with the parts she selected and the narrative she wished to. She stunned everyone in 1961 when she starred in The Children's Hour. It was as she made a daring move by portraying Martha Dobby, who subtly revealed her amorous feelings. Audrey Hepburn's portrayal of her best friend at the time suggested that she had affection for him. Lesbian relationships were still classified as scandalous by the Hays Code. Since homosexuality is a form of sexual perversion, MacLaine's actions weren't only dangerous, they were interestingly and even more unexpectedly. She then disclosed that she and Hepburn never spoke. Regarding the central idea of the story, which was that silence revealed a lot about how taboo the film's tragic conclusion, in which MacLaine's heroine takes her own life, and regrettably, Hollywood adopted the practice of eliminating gay characters. Only 2 years later, she had opened a door that others were too scared to touch. MacLaine took a totally different turn in 1963 and featured in Irma. People adored Luce's portrayal as a sweet Parisian prostitute this time. She performed the part so flawlessly that she received a second Oscar nomination, and her intense preparation for the role is what truly jumps out about her Golden Globe triumph. She actually spent time with a real sex worker with Jack Lemmon in order to comprehend the life was better, since the woman had to leave in the middle of the meeting because it was so real. The film, To See a Client, made nearly $25 million at the box office. It's like raking in money when it just costs $5 million to make adjustments for today. It could have been a Marilyn Monroe movie worth hundreds of millions, but she left after reading offensive things. MacLaine took on the job and made it unforgettable, despite what the director had said about her. Because of the pimp persona, Lemmon had been cautioned against performing it, but it all repaid in the Netherlands, where the movie set records for about a third of the after country saw it. Sweet Charity came out in 1969, and MacLaine wasn't simply the star, she made it happen by presenting the concept to Universal and insisting that Bob Fsy be the filmmaker, and managed to pull it all together. FYI, he had never directed a movie before, but years ago, MacLaine trusted him, and he gave her a great break. Now, she repaid the favor. At the time, the project cost $20 million. Would be almost $150 million today, and despite its lackluster earnings, demonstrated her courage. And what's amazing is that the original Broadway character had been made for the wife of Fsy's Gwen Verdon, but she was not given the studio portion. Want a more well-known name, and MacLaine was that name. The outcome was her appearance, and she continues to showcase her dancing abilities, which she had been honing, in the song If My Friends Could See Me Now. Things weren't always easy behind the scenes during her early-stage career. The producer wanted something shinier, but Lon stuck with FSY the entire time to maintain the raw, gritty tone. MacLaine maintained her star power throughout the 1960s in spite of all the risks she took. She received 2 Studios Appreciation and was nominated 5 times for Golden Globes. Enough to support her decisions, including displacing a prominent producer on Sweet Charity because they couldn't agree. It was uncommon for any actress, particularly a woman, to have that kind of influence with FSY. Period, and she took time off from Hollywood to help instead of just chasing money. By the end of the 1970s, George McGovern's presidential campaign had she was one of the top-paid actresses in the industry for 10 years, and she was given enormous contracts such $750,000 for an unfinished project, which is more than $6 million in order to maintain her name. Shirley MacLaine met Steve Parker today. For hours after they were first acquainted, in a Manhattan pub in 1952, he suggested it was impetuous. Thrilling and intensely romantic, but they delayed marriage for a while, and she was still attempting to get a job on Broadway as a pajama game understudy, but by 1954, right before her Hollywood career was set to take off, they were married. However, concerned that success would hurt their relationship, Parker once he moved to Japan after telling her, "If I stay in Hollywood, I'll always be Mr. MacLaine," to establish his own career as a film producer in 1956, and ever then they were married for 28 years while living on different continents. Maintaining what MacLaine subsequently referred to as her primary relationship despite the fact that the rest of in the same year that their daughter Sachi was born, Shirley called it something that the world couldn't comprehend. Life-altering, and they briefly appeared to be the ideal family, but in just 15 years, Shirley starred in 25 films, igniting her career in Hollywood. Living at home among icons like Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Audrey Hepburn wasn't even as she stated that if she had been frustrated, she would never have given up acting to become a full-time mother. Would have been more detrimental to everyone, as her connection with Sachi, and everything would resurface decades later when Sachi revealed according to her version of events, Shirley and Steve's marriage was unusual from the start. She clarified that open marriage was a common term that they were living by. Simply put, they did as they pleased while he lived in Japan and she lived in America. Kept in touch, Shirley was honest about the men she dated and showed no remorse about it. Was with politicians and actors, even a prime minister or two didn't understand, but she didn't care that the marriage survived because of independence, but then Sachi was taken to Japan at the age of 6 to live with her father full-time. Shirley's motivations were a babysitter who believed in kidnapping stories and that children weren't secure in Hollywood. She only spent the summers with her daughter. Sachi claimed that she had never felt abandoned at the time, but as she grew older, the story in her 2013 memoir, she revealed that she felt forgotten and alone. Tales of Shirley receiving a job offer, being cut off from money, and spending Christmas alone at boarding school. Shirley named the book, which was made up to end one of Sachi's romances. Primarily fiction, but Shirley had already caused harm years before. Stunned everyone in 2011 when she made yet another admission on Oprah's show. Acknowledged having 3 separate sexual encounters in a single day during a political campaign in the 1970s. Since she didn't want to be excluded, it wasn't a prank, but rather a component of she remarked of falling in love with her co-stars despite the fact that she drew Jack Nicholson, who was too dangerous, and Jack Lemmon, who was too kind. She had changed from pursuing males to Terry, a rat terrier, by that point. Best friend, she declared, "I'd rather have a funny loyal dog than a man." Her job remained as daring as her off-screen life, and she meant it. She co-starred with Clint Eastwood in the 1970 film Two Mules for Sister Sarah. When the director Don Siegel phoned her, and the two got along poorly right away. Everyone on the set sensed the tension when she was described as unfeminine and having too much balls. And to make matters worse, the majority of the crew became ill in Mexico, but the movie made money, but Clint Eastwood never took second billing again. Perhaps Shirley's experience played a role in that, and in she shocked everyone in 1975 by creating a documentary about China. Had only recently begun to open up to the West and undoubtedly had unique access to movies. As a result of daily existence, the other half of the sky was strong and even. Received an Oscar nomination, revealing a previously undiscovered aspect of her personality. Someone who was not just an actor but also a woman with a global perspective and political consciousness showed a fresh side. Following a protracted hiatus from acting from 1970 to 1977, she almost disappeared from Hollywood, but she wasn't idle. She visited far-flung locations and lived with African tribes, traveled to India and even scaled the Himalayas in Bhutan, but she wasn't only taking in the sights, but these were spiritual excursions, and she began to meditate. When she returned at the pivotal moment, critics observed the shift in reincarnation and metaphysics. She had depth, calmness, and something more now that she wasn't playing the clown. Deep, but on the set of The Turning Point, even her return wasn't seamless. She argued with director Herbert Ross because she felt he was conceited. Regarding the portrayal of her role, she aimed to depict the mental anguish of a lady who sacrificed everything for her family, a tale she was familiar with, and the movie was a success. Despite receiving 11 nominations, it didn't win any Oscars, yet it demonstrated that Shirley MacLaine was speaking the truth instead of merely acting. The early 1980s weren't merely a career high for Shirley MacLaine, both on and off screen. They were a maelstrom of drama, scandal, and feuds that continue to reverberate today. It all began in Hollywood in 1980 when Anthony Hopkins starred in the movie A Change of Seasons. What was originally intended to be a love drama, it devolved into a Cold War between two celebrities who Hopkins later claimed that Shirley was the most annoying actress he had ever worked with since they could hardly stand each other. Their personalities and performing styles clashed, and even though when the director was removed in the middle of the shoot, the production collapsed, and the team had to set up scenes to keep them apart, and decades later, when Shirley was questioned about him, she didn't miss a pummeled, and while I don't like him either, that wasn't nearly as horrible as what then. In 1983, Shirley began to show affection, and that's when the true her co-star Deborah Winger, who was younger, wilder, and more prepared to fight, started the pyrotechnics. Sparks flew Shirley for every inch of screen real estate from the first time they met. Appeared wearing Winger combat boots, movie star fur coats, and a mimicked the director.